afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 4 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll be taking up is related to the IPCC assessment report. The second article is related to Caste Survey, as the Chief Minister of Jharkhand has approved the Caste Survey in the state. The third article is related to GSLV, as recently ISRO has launched a new meteorological satellite INSAT 3DS using the GSLV. And the fourth article is related to triple dip La Nina, as a new research has pointed out a link between triple dip La Nina and the cleaner than usual air quality in winter in Delhi. Now, the first article is related to IPCC assessment report. The context behind it is that several member countries of IPCC have asked the IPCC Bureau to publish the 7th assessment reports by 2028. As the next global stocktake is going to happen in 2028, this is important in GS3 under the topic environment. So we will be discussing about the 6th assessment report of the IPCC, its key findings, particularly related to India, and a few suggestions as well, and the findings of the last global stocktake. Before that, let's understand about IPCC. IPCC as an organization does not conduct any scientific research on its own. It does not even collect or monitor any scientific data or climate related data or parameters. It only accumulates and synthesizes the scientific outputs from various authors, contributors and reviewers around the world and collates them and publishes the assessment reports. As a body, it was established by the World Meteorological Organization and the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, and it constitutes of a plenary as well as a bureau and an executive committee. It is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations and it constitutes of 3 working groups. The working group on the physical science basis, which works on the science of the Earth's climate, and the second working group works on the impacts, adaptations of the climate change, etc. And the third working group works on the mitigation of climate change. It also has a task force on the national greenhouse gas inventories. And the material that it collects and collates, it is contributed by thousands of authors, that is scientists around the world, and thus it publishes these assessment reports. The first assessment report was published in 1990 and the latest, the 6th assessment report, was published in the 2021-2022 cycle in the form of 3 reports, part 1, part 2 and a synthesis report as well. Now, what are the findings of the 6th assessment report? It has given a few findings. For example, the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, they have been at the highest level in the past 2 million years. The sea levels have risen so much that the rate of the sea level rise is the fastest in the past at least 3000 years. And the Arctic sea ice, it is melting at such a fast rate that the net area of the Arctic Sea, which is under the ice cover, it is at the lowest level in the past 1000 years. And the glaciers are retreating at an unprecedented rate in at least the last 2000 years. And if such trends are continuing in future also, then by 2100, by the end of this century itself, we will be observing the temperature rise by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius, the global temperature as compared to the pre-industrial levels. And if we take any substantial cuts in emissions, for example, if we follow the NDCs, the voluntary nationally determined contributions which have been pledged by the various nations under the Paris Agreement, then also the temperature rise may exceed even 2 degrees Celsius. These are few of the major findings. Now let's talk about the India related findings in particular of the 6th assessment report of IPCC. One, it notes that India is a particularly vulnerable hotspot because India is going to become a victim of climate disasters if substantial action is not taken to control the climate change, the rise in the temperatures. For example, the sea level rise, which will be disproportionately impacting India because the Indian Ocean sea level rise is higher than the world average, and it will be impacting Mumbai in particular, for example, which will be a victim of flooding as well. The heat waves will be more frequent. For example, Ahmedabad, which is quoted as a case study in the report, and the crop yields will also be coming down. The crop yields may fall by 9% by 2050 itself, by the mid of this century itself, and there will be an adverse impact on the health. For example, there will be more prevalence of the waterborne diseases, vector-borne diseases such as malaria, dengue, etc., particularly in the tropical South Asian region as per the report. And if there is no control mechanism which is put in place, it will lead to a damage of about $36 billion for India if there are no measures put in place to control the rising temperatures. And even if the rising temperatures are controlled, even then there will be a damage of about $24 billion for India as per the 6th assessment report. Now, there are a few suggestions also which the report gives how to control these rising temperatures. One, the report says that the masses have to be sensitized. How? For example, we can engage NGOs. The report says that Greenpeace India, etc., such NGOs can also be engaged in sensitizing masses, and the accounting mechanisms, GDP, etc., they should be changed. We can put in place the accounting mechanism as green accounting, green GDP, etc. And the historical responsibility of the developed countries also has to be taken into account. Because the developed countries, the Western nations, they developed first, they industrialized first, and during the early industrialization era, there were not any stringent environmental norms in place. Therefore, they industrialized using fossil fuels which were very polluting in nature, and the developing countries which are still undergoing industrialization, they are not even polluting environment as such because the stringent environmental norms are in place. And because of that early movers advantage, the developed countries which have contributed more towards the polluting of the world, towards the rising in the global temperatures, they have that historical responsibility to contribute more in climate change mitigation as well as adaptation also, because it will ensure the upholding of the principle of equity and justice. And there is need for adaptation. The adaptation also has to be done at local levels. For example, the case studies of Surat and Indore, that the measures which were put in place, they prevented such cities in India also from becoming urban heat islands, and the temperatures in general did not rise as much. Now there are a few more findings. For example, the report suggests that the global emissions, they must peak before 2025, and there should be a reduction of the global emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions globally by 43% by 2030 and even 60% by 2035. And we need to remove carbon because there should be a net zero carbon emissions by 2050 by the report, and there should not be any more use of the fossil fuels per se. How? The report suggests that if there are no mechanisms to control the emissions, such power plants, for example coal power plants, should not be allowed, that the new coal power plant should not be built, particularly in the OECD countries. They should be phasing out the existing coal power plants also, and if there are no carbon capture and storage mechanisms in such coal power plants, they have to be phased out even quicker. And regarding transforming systems, the report suggests that we have to decarbonize the industry in general, and we have to protect the natural landscapes, restore lands, prevent deforestation, prevent desertification, land degradation, and even reverse those. And the buildings in general, they should be zero carbon emission buildings, and the renewable energy capacities, they have to be scaled up. Even the cities, they have to be designed in such a manner that they are low carbon emitting in terms of transport and various services provided also. Not only that, the report notes that there has to be a behavioral change in general also. How? For example, the report notes that the top 10% of the wealthy people globally, they are accounting for 45% of the global emissions. Therefore, there is an inequality in the global emissions also. If the wealthy people, they cut down upon the global emissions that they are causing, if they use public transport or such energy saving measures, such less carbon emitting measures, then the global emissions will be coming down. Now there is a global stocktake report also. This global stocktake report is part of the Paris Agreement. under Article 14 subclause 1. The Paris Agreement gave certain goals. There were certain goals which were agreed upon by the countries. That is, one, that the global temperature rise will be controlled and it won't be allowed to rise more than 2 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial levels, and there will be efforts to control the rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius itself, and some voluntarily nationally determined contributions would also be given by various countries, and there will be a global stocktake every 5 years which will be to monitor the progress which was promised by the various countries through their NDCs. Now the latest global stocktake report notes certain positives also. There has been good participation levels, that 194 parties have participated in the stocktake, and the projected global temperature rise that has come down. If there are no measures which were put in place through the nationally determined contributions, the projected global temperature rise would have been between 3.7 degree to 4.8 degrees Celsius, whereas now it may be between 2.4 degrees Celsius to 2.6 degrees Celsius. It has come down, but not sufficiently. There are certain concerns also. One, the nationally determined contributions, they are not sufficient. How? That the global carbon emissions, for example, in the form of CO2 emissions, the CO2 sink has to be that of 23 billion tons of CO2. Whereas if the NDCs are implemented, it will create only a 2 to 3 billion tons of CO2 only. Therefore, there is an emission gap of 20 tons of CO2 also. Plus the GHG emission reductions, the target we are not going to achieve, we are not even close, that 60% emissions reduction in GHGs by 2035 or net zero by 2050, we are not even close to that target. And the climate action, there is a deficit in that the developed countries, they are not shouldering the responsibility. There is deficit in terms of technology transfer, in terms of finance, mitigation as well as adaptation. Now what does it recommend, the global stocktake report? One, it says that the unabated fossil fuels usage that should be eliminated. For example, again the coal power plants, if they do not have the carbon capture and storage mechanism, if the fossil fuels emissions they are unabated, then they have to be eliminated quicker. Then more carbon sink has to be put in place through forestation, etc., and climate finance has to be given by the developed countries. Now coming on to the second article, this is related to caste survey. The context behind it is that the Jharkhand CM has approved a caste survey in the state. Now there is a trend, earlier it was happening in Bihar also. This points to the states putting a pressure upon the central government to conduct a socio-economic caste census. The latest one, the earlier one was conducted in 2011. This is important in GS1 under the topic Salient Features of Society and Diversity of India. Before coming on to the caste survey, let us understand the difference between the similar terms census, socio-economic caste census and caste survey. Coming on to the statutory backing, census has a statutory backing, it has a legal backing as it is conducted as per the Census Act of 1948. The socio-economic caste census does not have any specific statutory backing, but the central government may authorize by issuing a notification for the conducting of a socio-economic caste census. The first time it was conducted in 2011 for gathering the socio-economic data for the backward classes. Whereas regarding the caste surveys, there is no statutory backing at all. It is usually conducted by the state governments for gathering the socio-economic data for the various castes. Now the caste data which is collected under census, it is done usually for the SC/STs, and for the OBCs it was done for the first time in 2011, but that 2011 socio-economic caste census data has also not been published till date, and the state governments conduct them for various castes regarding the caste survey. Now regarding the confidentiality, the census data, all of the census data is kept confidential, whereas the socio-economic caste data, the personal information which is collected, it is accessible to the government departments because it is used for providing the benefit allocation. Whereas the caste survey which is conducted, the information which is collected, it is available and used for policy making decisions by the state governments. We had discussed earlier various case laws regarding the caste census, caste survey, etc. Now let's discuss the advantages of the caste survey. One, it will help in better policy making by the states and better targeting of welfare. For example, if we consider the implementation of the National Food Security Act (NFSA), then about 84% people in Bihar should be eligible for getting the benefits under NFSA. So if the population of Bihar is about 130 million people, then about 110 million should be eligible, whereas the actual count of the beneficiaries who are getting benefits under NFSA in Bihar, that is less than 90 million. So about 20 million people are being excluded from getting such benefits. If such caste surveys are conducted, then they can also be included in the various welfare delivery schemes, etc. Plus, there might be a rationalizing of reservation schemes so that the people who are still missing out, who are not getting the benefits of reservation, they will also be included if the caste survey is done. Plus, the caste has a significance in the Indian society. It is considered of paramount importance. And despite that, there has been no profiling on the basis of caste since 1930 in India. It will ensure the promotion of social justice and inequality, as in some castes there is a lot of inequality. Plus, there is a constitutional mandate also which will be fulfilled. That Article 340 mandates the setting up of a commission to investigate the conditions of the various castes in India and to suggest measures as well, and it will help in fulfilling the objectives of various commissions. For example, the Justice Rohini Commission recommended the subcategorization of the OBCs, the other backward classes, and its objectives will also be fulfilled. Plus, the conducting of caste surveys, it will help in breaking various myths, and the propagandas also will be eliminated. For example, they claim that Lingayats are huge in number in Karnataka. If caste survey is conducted, we'll get to know how many Lingayats are there in Karnataka. Now, there are certain disadvantages of the caste survey also. One, it will lead to political mobilization, it will lead to vote bank politics, and people will be divided on the caste lines also, and on the basis of caste they will be voting for various parties also, and therefore it will be hampering the national integration, because as long as caste remains as an important part of the society, it somewhere hampers the national integration too, as per some schools of thought. Plus, there will be more demands for reservations. It will open up Pandora's box. Already there are demands for reservation by various communities, for example, Patels, Gujars, etc. And there is a complexity in the data collection regarding the caste data. For example, the same caste, they are spelled differently in different states, and this will cause huge complexity while collecting data. There are certain suggestions which can be given rather than conducting a caste survey. One, the implementation of technology. We can use machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc. while collecting and collating data for the various castes, various people. Plus, a kind of a preliminary census can be conducted. A kind of a socio-anthropological study can be conducted to determine the broad basis of the distribution and the numbers of the castes in India. And a subcategorization of OBCs can also be done as per the recommendations of the Justice Rohini Commission. Now coming on to the third article, this is related to GSLV. The context behind it is that ISRO launched a new generation meteorological satellite INSAT 3DS using the GSLV. This is important in GS3 Science and Technology. Now, the INSAT 3DS is a satellite which will be used to monitor the Earth's surface, the climate, oceans, etc. And this will be helping India in making better predictions in terms of weather predictions, climate predictions, as well as other such meteorological data. This will be placed in the geosynchronous orbit. Before that, it has been placed in the geosynchronous transfer orbit by the GSLV. Geosynchronous transfer orbit is an orbit at an altitude of about 37,000 kilometers from the surface of the Earth, where the satellite usually orbits the Earth once per day. Therefore, it stays over the same surface area of the Earth and it is used for monitoring that. Now let's come on to GSLV. As compared to PSLV, it is capable of carrying heavier payloads. The Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle can carry a weight of up to 2000 kgs, but it can carry it up to the low Earth orbit, that is at an altitude of 600 to 900 kilometers from the surface of the Earth. Whereas the GSLV can carry a payload of up to 4 tons up to the orbit of the geostationary transfer orbit, that is at an altitude of 37,000 kilometers from the surface of the Earth. The geostationary launch vehicle consists of three stages. The first stage consists of the solid rocket motor, which has four liquid strap-on engines. This stage provides the maximum thrust. The second stage consists of the liquid engine, and the third stage consists of the cryogenic engine, the cryogenic technology which India has indigenously developed recently. The first successful launch of the satellite using the GSLV was in 2014. Now, the project GSLV Mark III, which is now named as the Launch Vehicle Make 3, this was a project which was approved in 2002, essentially to ensure that India has the capability to transfer heavy payloads into the geosynchronous transfer orbit also. Now it can transfer up to 4.3 tons to the geosynchronous transfer orbit and even up to 10 tons to the low Earth orbit, which is at an altitude of only 600 to 900 kilometers. This is important as it will be cost effective for India. India will not have to use the launch vehicles of other countries, and it will be reliable as it will be used for Gaganyaan, sending manned missions to space. Earlier it was used for sending Chandrayaan 2, Chandrayaan 3 also. But it is termed as the naughty boy. Why? Because the GSLV has failed also in the past. The failure rate of GSLV is higher than the PSLV. The PSLV is termed as the workhorse of ISRO as the PSLV failed only twice in 60 launches. Whereas the GSLV has already failed 4 times out of the 15 satellite launches, and the recent failure was the Earth Observation Satellite O3. The pain is the cryogenic technology. We earlier borrowed it from Russia. We had imported the cryogenic engine from Russia, but the USA objected to that because it was allegedly violating the MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime. Therefore, Russia could not transfer the technology, the cryogenic technology, to India, and India first reverse engineered the Russian cryogenic engine that we had got from Russia, and later on we have now developed our own indigenous cryogenic technology also. Let's also look at the comparison of GSLV with the other launch vehicles around the world. There are other bigger launch vehicles also, for example Falcon 9 feet, Falcon Heavy, Ariane and Delta IV Heavy, which can carry much more payloads as compared to GSLV. Now coming on to the next article, it is related to triple dip La Nina. The context behind it is that a research has recently pointed a link between the cleaner than usual air in winters in Delhi and the triple dip La Nina, whereas the air in Mumbai is rather not as clean as compared to usual conditions there, and it is attributed to triple dip La Nina. This is important in the topics geography and environment in GS1 and GS3. Before coming on to triple dip La Nina, let's understand a few basics very briefly. Whenever the sea surface temperatures are warm, usually there is low pressure near the sea surface and the air usually rises at that place. There is a convective current which is formed, and when there is a cold sea surface temperature, there is higher pressure comparatively at the sea surface and the air is subsiding over there. When there are normal conditions, that is there is no El Nino, there is no La Nina, in the normal conditions, there is a cold current which is available off the coast of Peru, that is the Peruvian cold current. It is an upwelling zone, whereas the cold water is coming from down below and it creates high pressure conditions near the sea surface, and therefore the air is subsiding near the Peru. And in the normal conditions, the sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific Ocean near Australia, that is the western equatorial Pacific Ocean, the sea surface is warm and therefore the air is usually rising, and this air goes towards the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean and subsides there. This forms a circulation in the air. This circulation is known as the Walker circulation. During normal conditions, this is the situation. When there is La Nina, it is the strengthening of the Walker circulation. That is, there is more cold water available near Peru, near the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean, and there is more warm water accumulation near the western equatorial Pacific Ocean, that is near the coast of Australia, and the water circulation is strengthened. When there is La Nina like condition, it leads to various temperature and rainfall conditions in various parts of the world. For example, it leads to dry and warm weather near the southeastern USA, whereas it leads to cool and wet weather near the North America and Canada. Now, when this air is rising near the western equatorial Pacific Ocean near the coast of Australia, it goes in both directions, towards the east equatorial Pacific Ocean also and towards the Indian Ocean also. Now let's discuss briefly the other condition also, that is El Nino. During the times of El Nino, the convection shifts eastward, that is the water which is there at the sea surface near the coast of Australia, near the western Pacific Ocean, it is cooler rather than being warmer, and the warm water is available rather near the central equatorial Pacific Ocean or towards the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean, and therefore here the pressure is increasing at the sea surface level and the air is subsiding over here, and therefore there is lesser rainfall near the coast of Australia during the El Nino conditions. Now triple dip La Nina is considered as an event when the La Nina like conditions are prevalent consecutively for 3 years. That is, the sea surface temperatures near the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean, they are cool. Now let's discuss the impacts of both La Nina and El Nino. First, let's discuss the impact of El Nino. One, it has an adverse impact upon the food chain. For example, when there is El Nino like condition, there is lesser availability of cold water near the coast of Peru, there is lesser upwelling. Why upwelling is important? Because upwelling brings more nutrients from the sea, and because there is availability of more nutrients, it leads to the growth of phytoplankton. Those phytoplankton are eaten by the fish and it contributes to the growth of various marine organisms also. Therefore, when there is lesser availability of upwelling, lesser availability of nutrients, it disrupts the food chain. Likewise, it has an adverse impact upon the species also. Various species, they will be carried by the warm tropical waters. The tropical species will be carried towards the colder regions, which will adversely impact the ecosystem. Plus, it will have adverse impact the changes in temperatures around the world. For example, during winters, the temperatures over the northern USA and Canada, they will be warmer, they will be higher. Likewise, it can lead to floods and droughts in various regions. For example, when there is El Nino like conditions, there will be floods over the southeastern USA, the southeastern coast of USA, whereas there will be drought like conditions over Australia, Indonesia, etc. Therefore, it has overall an adverse impact around the world, whereas the impact of triple dip La Nina, it is usually positive. On India, it has a particularly positive impact. How? For example, when there is the La Nina, that is the water circulation is strengthened, then air is rising near the Australian coast, and that air is going in both directions, towards the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean also and towards the Indian Ocean also. When it is coming towards the Indian Ocean, it subsides near the Madagascar. Therefore, there is a high pressure system which is formed near the Madagascar. Because there is low pressure system availability over India during summers, therefore the air comes from the Madagascar towards the India, and therefore it brings rain along with it. That is, the La Nina has overall a positive impact over the monsoon. It leads to good monsoon in general. And if we consider it globally, again it can have various impacts. For example, it will lead to cool and wet summers over the northern USA as well as Canada, and it will lead to lesser desert like conditions over Australia and Indonesia, etc. Thank you.